My father told me I wasn't allowed at the Christmas party because my younger brother wanted to show off his successful girlfriend. 3 months later, my brother applied for a job and HR introduced me as the CEO. He froze in shock. Then my parents showed up at my place, but I called. My family, the people who should have celebrated my every triumph, barred me from their Christmas table. Why? Because my hard-won success somehow threatened their carefully constructed image for my brother's new, prestigious girlfriend. And then, 3 months later, karma served up a dish so perfectly cold, I almost didn't recognize my own brother when he walked into my company. For years, I'd chased validation from the very people who consistently denied it. At 32, I was Scarlett Jensen, CEO of Techvision Solutions, a tech startup I'd built from the ground up, now a thriving mid-sized company with over 200 employees. But my journey to this corner office, overlooking the bustling Seattle skyline, was anything but a tale of familial support. Growing up in Pittsburgh, I was always the anomaly in our household. My parents, Arthur and Evelyn Jensen, made it abundantly clear that my younger brother Julian was the golden child. 3 years younger than me, Julian received everything: the newest toys, the best opportunities, and most importantly, their unwavering attention and praise. From an early age, I learned to be self-sufficient. While my parents attended every one of Julian's Little League games and school plays, they rarely showed up for my academic competitions or piano recitals. "We're busy with Julian's event" became the most common, soul-crushing phrase I heard throughout my childhood. When it came time for college, the disparity became even more pronounced. "We've been saving for Julian's education since he was born," my father explained, his voice firm, unapologetic, when I asked about financial help for university. "He's going to be a doctor or a lawyer someday. You've always been independent, Scarlett. You'll figure something out." And figure it out I did. I worked 3 part-time jobs while maintaining a full course load at State University. I waited tables in the morning, worked at the campus library in the afternoon, and did data entry remotely at night. Sleep became a luxury, a distant dream, but I pushed through, driven by sheer will, graduating with honors with a degree in computer science and business administration. Meanwhile, Julian partied his way through freshman year at an expensive private university, promptly failed out, and then convinced our parents to fund his gap year that mysteriously extended into 3 years of finding himself, while traveling through Europe and Asia, all on their dime, of course. After college, I landed an entry-level position at a small tech firm. The pay was minimal, the apartment tiny and filled with secondhand furniture, but the experience? Invaluable. I worked 60-hour weeks, every spare minute poured into developing my skills and building side projects. While Julian was posting pictures of his exotic adventures abroad, I was coding until 3 a.m., fueled by an unyielding determination to create something meaningful. My breakthrough came 5 years ago, a revolutionary customer relationship management system, integrating AI to predict consumer behavior. I pitched my idea to several investors, faced countless rejections, but finally secured enough funding to launch Techvision Solutions. The first 2 years were brutal, relentless. I worked around the clock, hired a small team of brilliant developers, and poured every ounce of my being into making it succeed. There were moments I thought we wouldn't make it, funding was low, the product still rough around the edges. But I persisted. By year 3, our software gained traction. Major companies adopted our platform. Revenues started flowing. We expanded, moved into a proper office. I finally started paying myself a reasonable salary. This year, year 5, Techvision Solutions became a major player in the tech industry, valued at over $200 million. Throughout this grueling journey, my communication with my family dwindled to occasional holiday phone calls. They never asked about my company. When I tried to share my successes, they'd quickly change the subject to Julian's latest endeavor, which inevitably had failed by the time they told me about it. Julian eventually returned to the US and, thanks to our parents' connections, landed a job at a marketing firm. He did the bare minimum, but somehow always received praise. "Julian is really finding his way in the corporate world," my mother would gush. completely ignoring the fact that I was running my own successful company, building an empire. It was December, 3 weeks before Christmas, when everything came to a head. I was sitting in my corner office, overlooking the Seattle skyline, reviewing year-end reports and planning our expansion for the coming year when my phone rang. It was my mother calling, an unusual occurrence on a Tuesday afternoon. "Scarlett, dear," Evelyn said, her voice dripping with that saccharine sweetness she only used when she wanted something. "I'm calling about Christmas this year." I was surprised. In recent years, I'd received a text message invitation at most, usually just days before the holiday. A phone call 3 weeks in advance was unprecedented. "We're having everyone over on Christmas Eve. Your aunts, uncles, cousins, the whole family," she continued. "It would be lovely if you could join us this year." A warmth spread through my chest, a foolish, persistent hope. Despite everything, I still craved their acceptance, their inclusion. Maybe things were finally changing. Maybe they finally wanted to reconnect. "That sounds nice, Mom," I replied, trying to keep the hope from making my voice too shaky. "I think I can make it. My schedule is pretty flexible around the holidays." "Wonderful," she chirped, and I could practically hear her smile. "Oh, and Julian is bringing his new girlfriend, Chloe Davis. She works at Hamilton and Partners, you know, that prestigious consulting firm. Her father is a partner there." And there it was. The real reason for the call. "She's just brilliant," my mother continued, oblivious to my silence. "She graduated from Harvard Business School, and she's already on the fast track to becoming a junior partner. Julian met her at a charity gala. They've been dating for about 6 months now." "That's nice," I said, my voice flat, a stone in my throat. "I'm happy for him. Everyone is just so impressed with her. Your father tells everyone his son is dating a Harvard graduate. Can you imagine the Jensen family moving up in the world?" I took a deep, steadying breath, the familiar burn of injustice flaring up. "Mom, I tried. Did I tell you that Techvision was featured in Forbes last month? We're expanding to Europe next year, and oh, that's nice, dear," she interrupted, a wall of dismissal. "Anyway, Chloe comes from a really good family. Her mother is on the board of the symphony orchestra, and they have a summer home in the Hamptons. Julian says they might go there for New Year's. Isn't that exciting?" I bit my tongue. Very exciting. "Listen, Mom. I need to get back to work. I have a meeting in 5 minutes. "Of course, dear. We'll see you at Christmas. Wear something nice, will you? None of those business suits. Chloe is very fashion-forward." After we hung up, I stared at my phone for a long moment. I shouldn't have been surprised by my mother's behavior, but somehow it still stung. It always did. I shook it off, pushed it down, and returned to my work, trying desperately not to think about the upcoming holiday. A week before Christmas, as I was finalizing my travel plans to Pittsburgh, my phone rang again. This time, it was my father. He rarely called me, so I answered immediately, a cold not forming in my stomach, concerned something was gravely wrong. "Scarlett," he said, gruffly, without even a greeting. "Dad, is everything okay?" I asked, my voice tight. "I'm calling about Christmas," he stated. "Your mother and I have been talking, and we think it might be best if you don't come this year." I sat in stunned silence, my hand gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles went white. The blood drained from my face. "Julian's girlfriend comes from a good family," he continued, his voice firm, unapologetic, as if delivering a business report. "We don't want anything to complicate things." "Complicate things?" I repeated, my voice barely audible, a raw whisper of disbelief. "What does that mean?" "You know what I mean, Scarlett," he snapped, impatience bleeding into his tone. "Chloe comes from money, real success. Her family has connections. We need to show her that our family is respectable. And I'm not respectable?" The words came out sharper than I intended, stinging with years of buried resentment. "Don't twist my words," he barked. "Your brother has a chance at a good future here. This girl could really set him up for life. The last thing we need is you coming in with your alternative lifestyle." "My alternative lifestyle?" I was genuinely confused now, disbelief coloring my tone, a laugh of pure incredulity bubbling up. Dad, I'm the CEO of a technology company. What are you even talking about? All that independent woman stuff, the career obsession, the way you always have to one-up your brother with your so-called success. So-called success. The words hit me like a physical blow, a punch to the gut that stole my breath. You've always been difficult, Scarlett, he continued, when I didn't respond. Always had to do things your own way, never considering how it affects the family. Just this once, can you think about someone other than yourself? Think about your brother's future. I sat there, phone pressed to my ear, as my father systematically dismantled any illusion I had about my place in the family. I wasn't being banned from Christmas because of anything I had done. I was being banned because of who I was, successful, independent, and utterly unwilling to pretend I was less than I was. I understand, I finally managed, my voice steady despite the hot, prickly tears threatening to spill. Enjoy your Christmas. Good, he replied, sounding relieved that I hadn't argued, that he'd successfully handled the difficult daughter. Your mother will call you after the holidays. After hanging up, I sat motionless at my desk, staring out at the Seattle skyline as the winter sun set early, casting long, mournful shadows across the city. I had built this company, this career, this life, all on my own, without their help or support. And still, it wasn't enough. Not enough to make me worthy of a place at their Christmas table. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to cry over my family's rejection. Not quiet tears, but deep, gut-wrenching sobs that left me gasping for breath, my chest aching. I cried for the little girl who had never been enough. For the teenager who had worked herself to exhaustion trying to earn approval that would never come. And for the woman who still, despite everything, yearned for her parents' acceptance. When the tears finally stopped, I wiped my face, straightened my shoulders, and returned to my work. If I wasn't welcome at my parents' house for Christmas, I would create my own holiday. On my own terms. Christmas morning dawned cold and clear in Seattle. From my penthouse apartment, I could see the Space Needle illuminated with festive lights, and the streets below were quiet, most people at home, celebrating with their families. I had decorated my apartment half-heartedly. A small tree in the corner with a few ornaments, some garland draped over the mantel, a wreath on the door. It was my first Christmas completely alone, and the silence was deafening, amplified by the festive sounds drifting faintly from neighboring apartments. My phone pinged. A message from Maya Chin, my executive assistant. Merry Christmas, Scarlett. Hope you're having a wonderful day. Remember, my mom's famous eggnog is waiting for you if you change your mind about coming over. Maya had been horrified when I mentioned I'd be spending Christmas alone and had immediately invited me to her family gathering. I had politely declined, not wanting to intrude, but her thoughtfulness touched me deeply. Before I could respond, another message came through. This one from Grace Miller, my best friend since college. Merry Christmas, Becca. Liam and the kids are asking when Auntie Scarlett is arriving. The ham is in the oven, and there's a glass of wine with your name on it. Please tell me you're not spending today alone in that sterile apartment of yours. I smiled despite myself. Grace knew me too well. We had met during freshman orientation at State University and had been inseparable ever since. She had witnessed firsthand my struggles with my family and had opened her own family to me without hesitation, offering a warmth I rarely felt from my own. I stared at my phone for a long moment before making a decision. I texted Grace back, "Give me an hour. I'll bring dessert." I quickly showered and dressed, then stopped at the only open bakery to pick up a chocolate cake before driving to Grace's suburban home. As I pulled into the driveway, the front door flew open. Grace's 7-year-old twins, Isabella and Noah, raced out to greet me, still in their Christmas pajamas. "Auntie Scarlett, you came." Isabella shrieked, throwing her arms around my waist. "We thought you weren't coming," Noah added, taking the cake box from my hands. "Mom said you were working." I finished early, I lied, a small, grateful smile playing on my lips, following them into the house. Inside Grace's home was the opposite of my minimalist apartment. Every surface was decorated with Christmas cheer, lights, garlands, children's crafts, family photos. The air smelled of cinnamon and roasting ham, and Christmas music played softly in the background. Grace emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on an apron. "You came," she said, her voice warm with palpable relief. She embraced me tightly. "I'm so glad." Her husband, Liam, appeared behind her, their 2-year-old daughter, Sophie, on his hip. "About time you showed up, Scarlett." Grace has been checking her phone every 5 minutes. Throughout the day, I was enveloped in the genuine warmth of Grace's family. We ate a delicious meal, opened presents. Grace always had gifts for me, even when I insisted she shouldn't, played board games with the children, and talked and laughed by the fire. Not once did anyone ask about my work or my achievements or compare me to someone else. I was simply Scarlett, a loved and welcomed member of their celebration. As the evening wore on and the children grew tired, I helped Grace clean up the kitchen. "Thank you for today," I said quietly, rinsing a plate, a lump in my throat. I needed this more than I realized. Grace squeezed my shoulder. "Your family, Becca. You always have a place here." Family. The word both warmed and wounded me, a bittersweet echo. When I returned to my apartment that night, my phone had a new message. It was from Julian, and it contained a photo of my parents' Christmas celebration. There they were, my parents, Julian, and a beautiful woman who must have been Chloe, all smiling in front of the Christmas tree I remembered from childhood. The same ornaments, the same star on top. The message read, "Merry Christmas. Wish you could have been here, but Chloe's family joined us too, and it was a tight squeeze. Maybe next year." A tight squeeze. The house I grew up in had 5 bedrooms and a spacious living and dining room. It was never about space. I stared at the photo for a long time, noting how proud my father looked with his arm around Julian, how my mother beamed at Chloe. They were a picture-perfect family, and there was no place for me in the frame. Something shifted inside me at that moment. A door closed, and in its place, a window opened. If my family couldn't see my worth, I would stop seeking their validation. I would pour all my energy into the one thing that had never failed me, my work. The week between Christmas and New Year's, I worked longer hours than ever. I refined our 5-year expansion plan, initiated talks with potential European partners, and developed a new marketing strategy. My team was on holiday, so the office was quiet, allowing me to work without interruption, fueled by a new, fierce resolve. Maya returned to work on January 2nd and was shocked to find my office completely reorganized, new whiteboards filled with plans and strategies. "Did you work through the entire holiday?" she asked, concerned. "I had a breakthrough," I replied, not looking up from my computer. "I think this is going to be our biggest year yet." And it was. In the 3 months that followed, TechVision Solutions secured 2 major contracts with Fortune 500 companies, finalized our European expansion plans, and began developing a new AI product that promised to revolutionize the industry. I channeled all my hurt and rejection into productivity, and the company flourished as a result. I rarely thought about my family during this time. My parents didn't call after Christmas as promised, and I made no effort to reach out. Julian occasionally sent a text with updates about Chloe and their relationship, but I responded with brief, polite messages that revealed nothing about my own life. As March approached, I was fully immersed in preparations for our biggest expansion yet. We were moving to a larger office space in downtown Seattle and hiring dozens of new employees across all departments. TechVision Solutions was no longer a startup. It was becoming a major player, and I was at the helm, steering us toward even greater success. "Scarlett, do you have a minute?" Jasmine Henderson, our HR director, poked her head into my office one afternoon in mid-March. I looked up from the stack of reports I was reviewing. "Of course, Jasmine, what's up?" Jasmine entered, closing the door behind her. She held a folder in her hands and had an unusual expression on her face, somewhere between amused and concerned. "We've received over 300 applications for the senior project manager positions," she began, taking a seat across from me. "The hiring team has narrowed it down to about 20 candidates for first-round interviews." "That's great," I said, wondering why this required a personal visit rather than an email. "Are you finding quality candidates?" "For the most part, yes," she replied. "But there's one application I thought you should see." She placed the folder on my desk and slid it toward me. I opened it and immediately froze. The resume inside belonged to Julian Jensen, my brother. I quickly scanned the document, noting the inflated job titles and vague accomplishments. He had listed his current position as executive marketing strategist at a company I knew to be a small local firm where he was, at best, a mid-level marketing associate. Did you know he was applying? Jasmine asked carefully. She was one of the few people at the company who knew details about my family situation. No, I replied, still staring at the resume. I had no idea. He was quite confident during the phone screening, Jasmine said diplomatically. Actually, he was rather condescending to Alicia in HR, assuming she was just a secretary and asking to speak to someone who actually makes decisions. I winced. That sounded exactly like Julian. The position requires at least 5 years of project management experience and proficiency in 3 programming languages, Jasmine continued. As you can see, his resume doesn't meet those requirements, but he insisted we consider him for the senior role rather than an entry-level position. I sat back in my chair, mind racing, a strange mix of dread and anticipation swirling within me. Julian had no idea I was the CEO of Techision Solutions. I had always used my middle name, Victoria, in press releases and public appearances to maintain some privacy, and my brother had never shown any interest in my career. But now, by pure coincidence, or perhaps because our company's rapid growth had put us in the news, he had applied for a job at my company. What do you want to do? Jasmine asked, breaking my reverie. Obviously, there's a conflict of interest here. I considered my options carefully. I could reject his application outright, which would be entirely justified given his lack of qualifications. I could recuse myself entirely from the process and let the hiring team make their decision without knowing about our connection. Or I could use this as an opportunity to finally show my brother the truth about my life and success. I want you to treat his application like any other, I finally said, my voice firm. If he doesn't meet the basic qualifications, he shouldn't proceed to an interview. Jasmine hesitated. On paper, he's not qualified, she admitted. But he did mention some connections to potential clients that the team thought might be valuable. They put him through to the next round despite his lack of technical qualifications. Connections. Always falling upward because of who he knew, not what he could do. It was infuriating, yet so typical. When is his interview scheduled? I asked. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. I made a decision. I won't be directly involved in the hiring process. That wouldn't be ethical. But I'd like to observe the interview. Can you arrange for me to sit in anonymously? Perhaps introduce me only as a senior board member. Jasmine nodded. We can do that. The panel won't mention your name or title. After Jasmine left, I sat staring at Julian's resume, emotions swirling inside me. Part of me felt a flicker of guilt for what might seem like a setup. But another part, the raw, wounded part that had been rejected and dismissed for years, wanted Julian to finally see me for who I really was. Not just his overlooked sister, but a successful CEO who had built something significant through sheer hard work and determination. That night, I barely slept. I rehearsed in my mind how I would behave during the interview, professional, detached, fair. I wouldn't let our personal history affect my judgment. But I also wouldn't pretend to be less than I was. For once, Julian would see me clearly, without our parents' distorted, preferential lens. The next day, I dressed with extra care in a tailored navy suit, my hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. I reviewed Julian's resume once more and prepared a few technical questions that would challenge him without being unfairly aggressive. Then, I headed to the conference room where the interviews were being conducted, taking a seat at the far end of the table with the other observers. At precisely 2 p.m., Jasmine entered with Julian. My breath caught in my throat. It had been over a year since I'd seen my brother in person, and he looked older, more polished in his expensive suit. He carried himself with the same familiar, almost arrogant confidence of someone who had never truly been told he wasn't good enough. For a fleeting moment, I was that little girl again, watching from the sidelines as my parents lavished attention on their golden child. But then I remembered where I was, in the company I had built from nothing, sitting in a position of leadership I had earned through years of relentless work. And I straightened my shoulders, ready for whatever came next. The TechVision Solutions headquarters occupied the top 3 floors of a gleaming skyscraper in downtown Seattle. The conference room where Julian's interview was taking place featured floor-to-ceiling windows with spectacular views of Puget Sound. Modern art adorned the walls, and the sleek conference table could seat 20 people comfortably. It was a room designed to impress, and I could see from Julian's expression as he entered that it had achieved its purpose. Jasmine introduced the interview panel. Alicia from HR, whom Julian had spoken to on the phone, probably with disdain, Devin, the technical director, and Sophie, a current senior project manager. Then she gestured to the observer section where I sat with 2 other executives. We also have members of our leadership team observing today, Jasmine explained professionally. They'll be sitting in on several interviews to ensure consistency in our hiring process. Julian barely glanced at us, his attention focused solely on the panel. He smiled confidently as he took his seat, straightening his tie in a gesture I recognized from childhood, a habit he displayed when he was trying to impress someone important. "Thank you for the opportunity," he began smoothly. "I've been following TechVision's growth, and I'm excited about the possibility of bringing my expertise to your team." I bit back a smile. Julian had no idea what TechVision did beyond the most general description of tech solutions. If he had bothered to research the company at all, even a cursory Google search, he would have discovered my connection to it immediately. Devin started with a standard question. "Can you tell us about your experience managing complex technical projects?" Julian launched into a well-rehearsed response about a marketing campaign he had spearheaded at his current company. I coordinated between multiple departments, managed a substantial budget, and delivered results that exceeded expectations, he concluded, leaning back slightly as if expecting applause. "And what project management methodologies did you employ?" Devin pressed, his tone calm but probing. Julian hesitated. "I believe in a flexible approach that adapts to the specific needs of each project," he said vaguely. "I don't like to be constrained by rigid methodologies." Sophie jumped in. "Could you walk us through how you would set up a Kanban board for a software development project?" Julian's confidence faltered visibly, a flicker of panic in his eyes. "Well, I would delegate that to the technical team members," he replied, recovering slightly. "My strength is in the big-picture strategy, not the day-to-day technical details." The interview continued in this vein, with Julian attempting to deflect technical questions and emphasize his strategic vision and interpersonal skills. When cornered about his technical knowledge, he became dismissive, almost contemptuous. "Let's be honest," he said with a chuckle that contained a hint of condescension. "People like me aren't hired for coding skills. We're hired because we know how to lead, how to inspire, and how to connect with the right people. I have contacts at major corporations who could become valuable clients for TechVision." Alicia, who had been quiet after the initial introductions, spoke up, her voice surprisingly sharp. "Our senior project managers are expected to have both technical proficiency and leadership skills. They need to understand our products deeply to manage their development effectively." Julian waved his hand dismissively. "That's what technical assistants are for. In my experience, the most successful projects are led by people who understand business, not just technology. No offense, but self-made people without proper backgrounds often miss the bigger picture because they're too focused on technical details." I saw Jasmine's eyebrows rise slightly at the comment. Everyone in the room knew that TechVision had been built from the ground up by self-made people, myself included. "Tell us about a time when you faced a significant challenge on a project and how you overcame it," Devin asked, his tone professionally neutral despite the escalating tension in the room. Julian launched into a story about salvaging a marketing campaign after a vendor failed to deliver. "I worked through the weekend, making hundreds of calls to find a replacement vendor at the last minute," he claimed, puffing out his chest. "My boss was amazed that I managed to save the campaign single-handedly. I pressed my lips together to keep from reacting." I knew the story. It had happened at his previous job, but Julian hadn't saved the campaign. His assistant had worked the weekend while Julian took credit for her efforts. I knew because the assistant had later applied for a position at Techvision and had shared the real story during her interview. As the technical questions continued, Julian grew increasingly uncomfortable. He checked his watch several times and began to look irritated, his veneer of confidence cracking. "I think we're getting too caught up in the technical weeds," he said, clearly frustrated. "As I mentioned, my value lies in my strategic vision and connections. I'm being considered for several senior positions at other companies, so I'd appreciate if we could focus on how my unique skills would benefit Techvision." Jasmine exchanged glances with the panel members, then nodded slightly. "We're actually nearing the end of our scheduled time," she said. "Before we wrap up, our CEO, who will make the final decision on all senior hires, would like to ask you a few questions." Julian straightened, suddenly alert, a flicker of excitement in his eyes. Meeting the CEO hadn't been mentioned in the interview schedule. "Of course," he said, adjusting his tie again. "I look forward to it." Jasmine turned toward the observer section. "Scarlett, would you like to take over?" I stood and walked to the front of the room, every step deliberate, watching as recognition slowly dawned on Julian's face. His expression transformed from confident to confused, then shocked, and finally horrified. "Hello, Julian," I said calmly, extending my hand. "It's been a while." His mouth opened and closed without sound, his hand automatically rising to shake mine. His palm was clammy against my skin, a stark contrast to my own steady grip. "You're the CEO," he finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper, utterly disbelieving. "Scarlett Victoria Jensen, founder and CEO of Techvision Solutions," I confirmed, taking the seat directly across from him. I recused myself from the initial screening process for obvious reasons, but I do make the final decisions on all senior hires. The color had drained from Julian's face, leaving him ashen. His eyes darted around the room as if looking for an escape, but he was trapped in this moment of undeniable truth. "I have a few questions," I continued professionally, opening his resume folder. "I notice you've listed your current position as Executive Marketing Strategist, but when I contacted Hamilton Partners last week about a potential collaboration, Craig Hamilton mentioned you were a marketing associate. Can you explain the discrepancy?" Julian's eyes widened at the mention of his boss's name. "I handle executive-level projects," he stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. "It's a functional title rather than an official one." I nodded, making a note, my expression unreadable. "And you claim proficiency in Python and Java on your resume. Could you briefly explain how you would use either language to create an API integration?" I oversee teams that handle that sort of thing," he said, tugging at his collar, utterly flustered. "As I mentioned, I focus on strategy, not coding." "I see," I said, closing the folder with a soft click. "One last question. You mentioned having connections that could bring valuable clients to Techvision. Could you be more specific about those relationships and how they've translated to business results in your current role?" Julian shifted uncomfortably, squirming in his seat. "Well, Chloe's father, that is, my girlfriend's father, he's a partner at a major consulting firm. And my father knows several business owners in Pittsburgh who might." His voice trailed off as he finally realized how weak this sounded, how hollow. The connections he was so proud of were secondhand at best, leveraging relationships that weren't even his own. "Thank you for your time today, Julian," I said, standing to signal the unequivocal end of the interview. "Our HR team will be in touch regarding next steps." I extended my hand again, maintaining absolute professionalism despite the turmoil of emotions beneath the surface. Julian shook it weakly, still appearing shell-shocked. "Thank you," he mumbled, gathering his portfolio with trembling hands. Jasmine stepped forward to escort him out. As they reached the door, Julian looked back at me, a mixture of confusion, embarrassment, and something else, perhaps a dawning, terrible realization in his eyes. Then he was gone, and the room fell silent. Devin let out a low whistle. "Well, that was unexpected," he said, breaking the quiet. "I take it you two know each other." "He's my brother," I replied simply, gathering my notes. "Which is why I wasn't involved in the initial screening process. Please evaluate his application according to our standard criteria, without considering our relationship." The team nodded, though I could see the questions, the quiet astonishment in their eyes. I excused myself and returned to my office, closing the door behind me. Only then did I allow myself to process what had just happened. I hadn't planned to embarrass Julian, but I also hadn't protected him from the consequences of his own hubris and lack of preparation. For once, he had been judged solely on his own merits, without our parents' influence tipping the scales in his favor. I felt no satisfaction in his discomfort, no vengeful glee, only a strange, profound sense of closure. For years, I had worked in the shadows of my family's dismissal, building something they never bothered to acknowledge. Now, at least Julian knew the truth. Whether that would change anything remained to be seen. I had just finished gathering my thoughts when my office phone rang. It was Jasmine at the reception desk. "Scarlett," she said, her voice tense. "Your brother is still in the building. He's demanding to speak with you, and he's on the phone with someone. I think it might be your father." I closed my eyes briefly. Of course. This wasn't over. With Julian, it never was. "Send him in," I said, my voice betraying no emotion. "And Jasmine, thank you for handling the situation so professionally." "Of course," she replied. "That's what we do here. Handle things professionally." The subtle emphasis on her last words made me smile despite the impending confrontation. Whatever happened next, I had built a team of people who valued competence and integrity. That alone was worth celebrating. I had barely composed myself when Julian burst into my office without knocking. His face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and raw anger. "What the hell was that?" he demanded, closing the door behind him with more force than necessary, making the glass pane rattle. I remained seated, keeping my voice calm and professional. "That was a job interview, Julian, for a position you applied for." "You made me look like a fool," he exclaimed, pacing frantically in front of my desk. "You ambushed me." "I did nothing of the sort," I replied evenly, my gaze steady. "You applied to my company without doing even basic research. If you had, you would have known I was the CEO. Your lack of preparation isn't my responsibility." He stopped pacing to stare at me incredulously. "How was I supposed to know? You never talk about your work." "I've tried to talk about my work for years," I pointed out, the old weariness returning. "No one in our family has ever been interested. But a simple Google search of Techision Solutions CEO would have shown you my name and picture." Julian ran a hand through his hair, a gesture reminiscent of our father when he was frustrated and cornered. "This is just like you, Scarlett. Always trying to one-up me. Always trying to make me look bad." I took a deep breath, reminding myself to stay calm, to not engage in the familiar dance of accusation. "Julian, I recused myself from the initial screening process precisely to avoid any conflict of interest. The fact that you made it to the interview stage was based solely on the hiring team's evaluation. I only participated at the end, as I do with all senior position interviews. But you asked me those impossible technical questions," he protested, his voice cracking. "You knew I couldn't answer them." "Those were standard questions for the position you applied for," I explained patiently, though a part of me was screaming inside. "Every candidate is asked to demonstrate their technical knowledge and experience. That's why the job description clearly states the required skills and experience." Julian collapsed into a chair across from my desk, his initial anger giving way to a sullen, defeated defensiveness. "Dad's furious," he muttered, avoiding my gaze. "He's on his way here." I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach. "Dad, coming here. To my office." "I called him right after the interview," Julian admitted, not meeting my eyes. "He and Mom are both coming. They were already in Seattle visiting Chloe's parents." Of course they were. My parents had never visited me in Seattle, despite numerous invitations over the years, but they would travel across the country to meet their son's girlfriend's family. "Julian," I said carefully, "this is my workplace. Whatever family issues we have should be discussed privately, not in my professional environment." He shrugged, a gesture that conveyed both helplessness and a complete lack of concern for my boundaries. Too late. They're probably already in the building. As if on cue, my phone rang. It was the reception desk again. "Miss Jensen, your parents are here," the receptionist said, sounding slightly uncertain, perhaps sensing the brewing storm. "They're insisting on seeing you immediately. Should I send them up?" I closed my eyes briefly, centering myself, taking one last deep breath. "Yes, please escort them to my office. And could you ask Jasmine and Maya to join us in about 10 minutes? Having witnesses would hopefully keep the situation from escalating too far, or at least keep them from outright screaming." While we waited, Julian's phone chimed with a text message. He checked it and a smug, unsettling expression crossed his face. "Chloe's father might be interested in investing in your little company," he said, a defiant edge to his voice. "That's what connections can do for you." Before I could respond, the door opened and my parents entered my office. My father, Arthur, strode in first, his face set in the stern, disapproving expression I remembered so vividly from childhood scoldings. My mother, Evelyn, followed, her eyes darting around the spacious corner office with evident surprise, taking in the panoramic view, the sleek, modern design. "Scarlett," my father began without preamble, his voice booming. "What is the meaning of this? You humiliated your brother in a job interview. Is this some kind of revenge?" I stood, maintaining my professional composure, a cool facade. "Hello, Dad." "Mom. Please have a seat. This doesn't need to be confrontational." "Don't tell me how this needs to be," my father snapped, remaining standing, radiating anger. "Julian tells us you ambushed him, asked him impossible questions, made him look incompetent." "I did nothing of the sort," I replied calmly, my voice steady, betraying none of the furious indignation churning inside. "Julian applied for a senior position at my company without realizing I was the CEO. The questions he was asked are standard for all candidates applying for that role." My mother, who had taken a seat beside Julian, spoke up, her voice tinged with genuine astonishment. "Your company, you're the CEO here?" She looked around the office again, taking in the awards on the wall, the view of the Seattle skyline, the clear, undeniable trappings of success. "Yes, Mom. I founded Techision Solutions 6 years ago. I'm the CEO and majority shareholder." I couldn't keep a hint of hard-won pride from my voice. My father waved this away impatiently. "That's not the point. The point is Julian needs this job, and you're in a position to help him. That's what family does." "The position Julian applied for requires technical skills and experience he doesn't have," I explained, trying to keep my voice level. "It wouldn't be fair to other candidates or to the company to hire someone unqualified because of family connections." "So, you're refusing to help your brother?" my father demanded, his voice rising, accusatory. "After all we've done for you." Something inside me snapped at those words, a lifetime of grievances finally boiling over. "All you've done for me?" I repeated, my voice dangerously quiet, filled with decades of suppressed hurt and simmering anger. "And what exactly would that be, Dad?" My father looked taken aback by my tone, by the unexpected defiance. "We raised you, educated you." "No," I interrupted, surprising everyone in the room, including myself, by the sheer force of my conviction. "You raised me, but you didn't educate me. I worked 3 jobs to put myself through college while you paid for Julian's private university. You've never supported my career, never shown interest in my achievements, and most recently, you banned me from Christmas because you thought I might embarrass you in front of Julian's girlfriend." My mother gasped, a hand flying to her mouth. "That's not what happened." "It's exactly what happened," I said firmly, my gaze unwavering. "Dad called me a week before Christmas and told me not to come because Julian was bringing Chloe, and you needed to show her family that you were respectable." Those were his exact words. Julian looked uncomfortably between our parents, his bravado finally crumbling. "I didn't know about that," he said quietly, a whisper of shame. "Of course you didn't," I replied, a bitter irony in my voice. "You were too busy sending me photos of the Christmas celebration I was excluded from." My father's face had turned a furious shade of red. "This is ridiculous. We're getting off topic. The issue here is the job." "No, Dad," I interrupted again, my voice gaining strength. "The issue here is much bigger than a job. The issue is that for my entire life, I've been treated as less important, less valuable than Julian. I've worked incredibly hard to build this company, to create something meaningful. And not once have any of you shown genuine interest or pride in what I've accomplished. A knock at the door interrupted the tense, suffocating silence that followed. Jasmine and Maya entered, both wearing professionally neutral expressions, their presence a welcome buffer. "You asked us to join you, Scarlett," Jasmine said, her voice calm and steady. "Yes, thank you," I replied, grateful for their timely presence. "Mom, Dad, this is Jasmine Henderson, our HR director, and Maya Chin, my executive assistant. They're here to help clarify our hiring processes." My father glared at the newcomers, clearly furious at the interruption. "This is a family matter." "Actually," I said firmly, meeting his gaze, "this began as a professional matter. Julian applied for a job at my company. The fact that we're related doesn't change our hiring standards or procedures." Jasmine stepped forward, addressing my father directly. "Mr. Jensen, our hiring process is rigorous and fair. Every candidate is evaluated based on the same criteria. The senior project manager position requires specific technical skills and experience that were clearly outlined in the job description." My father turned back to me, his voice a low growl. "You're the CEO. You can make an exception." I acknowledged, but I won't. My company's success depends on having the right people in the right positions. Julian isn't qualified for a senior role. "So that's it?" My father demanded, disbelief and outrage contorting his face. "You're turning your back on your family?" "No," I said, my voice steady, uncompromising, radiating a newfound strength. "I'm maintaining the professional integrity of the company I built." "However," I added, looking directly at Julian, who still looked utterly deflated, "we do have entry-level positions in the marketing department that might be appropriate. You would need to start at the bottom and work your way up, learning the necessary skills along the way, but there would be opportunities for growth." Julian looked offended, his pride still smarting. "Entry level? I have 5 years of experience in marketing." "Yes," I agreed, "but not in technical project management. In our company, those are different career tracks." "This is ridiculous." My father snapped, his voice reaching a fever pitch. "You're punishing your brother because of your own insecurities. Always trying to prove you're better than everyone else." I felt a flash of white-hot anger, but kept my voice controlled, steeling myself against his familiar tactics. "Dad, I've built a $200 million company from nothing. I employ over 200 people. I don't need to prove anything to anyone. What I'm trying to do is run a successful business based on merit and hard work, not nepotism." My mother, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke up, her voice softer, almost pleading. "Scarlett, after all these years, can't you put aside your resentment and help your brother? Family should come first." "That's a convenient principle to invoke now," I replied, my voice edged with a bitter irony. "Where was family first when you excluded me from Christmas? Or when you refused to help with my college education? Or when you dismissed my career as a phase for years?" My mother had the grace to look uncomfortable, shame flickering in her eyes. "Things weren't always perfect, but they still aren't," I interrupted gently but firmly. "But I'm not refusing to help Julian. I'm offering him a legitimate opportunity to join the company at an appropriate level and learn the business properly. That's more help than I ever received." My father shook his head in disgust. "This is pointless. Come on, Evelyn. Julian. We're leaving. Your sister has made her choice." Julian stood, straightening his suit jacket with a jerky, wounded motion. "I wouldn't work for you anyway," he said, his voice thick with wounded pride, unable to meet my gaze. "I have other opportunities." As they turned to leave, I called after them. "The offer stands, Julian. If you change your mind, call Jasmine directly." My father ushered my mother and brother toward the door, his back stiff with indignation. But as they reached it, my mother hesitated. She turned back to look at me. Really look at me. Perhaps for the first time in years. Her expression was complicated, a mixture of confusion, resentment, and something else. Recognition, perhaps. "Your office is lovely," she said quietly, her voice barely a whisper. "You've done well for yourself." It wasn't an apology or even a congratulation, but it was something. An acknowledgement, however small, of the life I had built. After they left, Jasmine and Maya remained, both looking concerned. "Are you okay?" Maya asked softly. I took a deep breath and nodded. "Yes, actually. For the first time in a long time, I think I am." Because standing my ground, speaking my truth, and refusing to diminish myself to make others comfortable felt like freedom. It felt like finally becoming who I was always meant to be. 2 weeks passed without any contact from my family. I threw myself into work, finalizing our European expansion plans and overseeing the move to our new, larger office space. The confrontation with my parents and Julian had been painful, gut-wrenching even, but it had also been incredibly clarifying. For the first time, I had spoken my truth without apologizing for my success or minimizing my achievements to make others comfortable. It was Sunday afternoon, and I was enjoying a rare day off, curled up on my sofa with a book and a cup of tea when my phone rang. It was the security desk from my apartment building. "Miss Jensen, your parents are here requesting to see you." "Should I send them up?" I sat up straight, surprised. My parents had never visited my apartment before. After a moment's hesitation, I agreed to let them up, quickly glancing around to make sure the place was presentable, though a part of me didn't care. When I opened the door, I was struck by how much older my parents looked compared to just 2 weeks ago. My father's shoulders were slightly stooped, and my mother's smile was tentative, unsure, a stark contrast to her usual boisterous cheer. "Scarlett," my mother said softly. "Thank you for seeing us. We should have called first, but we weren't sure you'd agree to meet." "Come in," I replied, stepping aside to let them enter. They walked into my living room, taking in the modern furnishings, the floor-to-ceiling windows with views of the city, the tasteful art on the walls. I noticed my mother's eyes searching for family photos and finding none. "Can I get you any? Water, tea, coffee?" I offered, falling back on politeness to navigate the awkwardness. "No, thank you," my father answered, his voice subdued compared to his usual booming presence. "We won't stay long." We sat down, my parents on the sofa and me in an armchair across from them. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken words. "Julian lost his job," my father finally said, getting straight to the point, his voice hollow. "The day after we saw you, his boss found out he'd been interviewing elsewhere and let him go." I nodded, not surprised. Craig Hamilton was known for his lack of tolerance for disloyalty. "He's been applying for other positions, but nothing has come through yet," my mother added, her voice tinged with worry. "And Chloe, she broke up with him last week, said she needed to focus on her career." I felt a twinge of sympathy for my brother despite everything. Losing a job and a relationship in the same week was a difficult blow for anyone, even Julian. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said sincerely. "Is he okay?" My parents exchanged glances. "He's staying with us for now," my mother said, her gaze distant. "He's struggling." I waited, sensing there was more they wanted to say. My father cleared his throat, a nervous gesture. "Scarlett, about what happened at your office and at Christmas." He paused, clearly finding it difficult to continue, grappling with unfamiliar emotions. "What your father is trying to say," my mother interjected, her voice softer, more vulnerable than I had ever heard it, "is that we've been doing some thinking. And some realizing." "Realizing what?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral, guarded, a wall still up. "That we've been unfair to you," my mother admitted, her eyes welling up slightly. "For a long time, we didn't want to see how hard you've worked, what you've accomplished. We were wrong to exclude you from Christmas," my father added gruffly, the words sounding foreign on his tongue. It was cruel." The admission surprised me, shocked me even. I couldn't remember ever hearing my father acknowledge he was wrong about anything. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, my skepticism clear, my guard still firmly in place. "Is it because you want me to give Julian a job?" My father's face flushed. "Partly," he admitted with unexpected honesty, a glimmer of humility I hadn't seen before, "but also because seeing your office, your company, it made us realize we don't really know you, Scarlett. We've been so focused on Julian, on what we wanted for him, that we never really saw what you were building. And we should have," my mother added softly, a tear tracing a path down her cheek. We should have been proud of you. We should have supported you. I felt a complicated mix of emotions. Validation, yes, but also lingering hurt and a cautious, fragile hope. It's not too late, I said finally, my voice still quiet, to get to know each other. But it has to be different. I won't diminish myself or my achievements to make anyone else comfortable. Not anymore. My father nodded slowly, a genuine understanding in his eyes. We understand that now. At least, we're trying to. About Julian, my mother began tentatively. The offer I made still stands, I said. He can apply for an entry-level position in our marketing department. He'll have to earn any promotions based on his performance, just like everyone else. But I'll make sure he gets fair consideration. That's more than fair, my father acknowledged, a hint of relief in his voice. I'll talk to him. We sat in silence for a moment. Then my mother asked, "How did you do it, Scarlett? Build all this on your own?" For the first time in my adult life, my mother was asking about my work with genuine interest, not just polite dismissal. I began to tell her about the early days of TechVision, the challenges and breakthroughs, the long nights and small victories that had led to where I was now. As I spoke, I saw something new in my parents' expressions. Not just recognition, but a dawning respect. They were finally seeing me not as their daughter who needed to stay in her place, but as a successful woman who had created something significant through her own efforts. When they left an hour later, nothing had been completely resolved. Years of dismissal and favoritism couldn't be erased in a single conversation. But a door had been opened, a possibility created for a different kind of relationship moving forward. The following week, Julian called Jasmine to inquire about the entry-level marketing position. He sounded subdued, humbled by recent events. Jasmine put him through the standard application process, and he was interviewed by the marketing team without any special treatment. To my surprise, he accepted the position when it was offered, despite the significant pay cut from his previous job. On his first day, he stopped by my office looking nervous but determined. "I want to do this right," he said, his voice quiet. "Learn the business properly. Earn my place. That's all anyone is asking," I replied, a small, hopeful smile touching my lips. "And Scarlett, I'm sorry about Christmas. About a lot of things." I nodded, accepting his apology without making it too easy. "Show me with actions, not words, Julian. That's how trust is rebuilt." As spring turned to summer, small changes began to take place. My mother called regularly, asking about my work with genuine interest. My father was slower to change, but he made efforts in his own way, sending me articles about the tech industry or asking questions about TechVision's expansion plans. Julian surprised everyone by taking his new position seriously, arriving early, staying late, and soaking up knowledge from his colleagues. He still had moments of entitlement, still occasionally expected special treatment, but he was learning, growing. In July, I received another invitation, this time to my parents' anniversary dinner. There was no mention of who would or wouldn't be welcome. No conditions attached. Just a simple invitation to celebrate with family. As I confirmed my attendance, I reflected on the journey of the past 6 months. The painful Christmas exclusion had been a catalyst for change, forcing long-buried issues into the open. The confrontation in my office had been uncomfortable but necessary, creating space for honesty after years of polite fiction. We were not a perfect family, and we never would be. There was too much history, too many ingrained patterns to overcome completely. But we were finding a new way forward, based on truth, respect, and the recognition that family relationships, like anything valuable, require work and commitment from all sides. Standing up for myself hadn't destroyed my family, as I had feared for so many years. Instead, it had created the possibility for something more authentic to emerge from the ashes of old expectations and assumptions. Something that might, with time and effort, become stronger and more meaningful than what had come before. And for now, that possibility was enough. So, after all of this, I'm genuinely curious. If you were in my shoes, would you have given Julian that offer? Would you have been able to extend an olive branch after so many years of feeling overlooked? Or have you ever faced a moment where you had to fiercely stand up for yourself against family who just couldn't see your worth? I'm still navigating these complex waters, and I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Drop your insights, and let's keep this conversation going. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever fought to define your own success against the tide of family expectations, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for more real-life narratives about finding your voice and building your own version of family. Your support means the world. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes the family we choose becomes the truest reflection of our hearts. Sending you all strength and clarity.